9 years later. I sat in the familiar blue room with my hands folded in my lap. I always hated to see my therapist, but I knew I needed to. I was ready to let go of something that haunted me. The last 9 years were replayed in my head. Anytime I saw an ambulance or heard sirens, I'd get the anxiety that started in my stomach and worked its way up to my chest. Suffocating quietness filled the room. "Do you know which trauma we're working through today?" prompted my therapist. "Remember, we're aiming for something in the middle of your life." When I first started coming to see her, we began at the end, starting with my most recent trauma, then we went to my first trauma, and now we're working through the middle. I hated it. I hated moving through all the feelings that I had removed myself so far from. But here I sat, ready to begin. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I was exhausted, beyond exhausted, really. Cameron had just broken up with me the week prior. I'd been covering shifts at work to distract myself from what I was really feeling. School was amping up. Chemistry, physics, and history swarmed my mind with all their due dates fast approaching. I came home from swim practice that night, quickly ate dinner that mom prepared, then said goodbye to Dad as he left for his second job. Mom and Dad were struggling financially, though they wouldn't admit it. Dad had to pick up a second job to put my sister Sierra through a high-performance water polo program. She traveled at least once per month all year to compete. She was talented. I went off to bed. It wasn't even that late, maybe 7:30 or so. My skin burned from the chlorine lingering, and my hair was done up into a high bun that remained wet from practice. I figured I would shower in the morning. I let out a soft moan as I got into my softer-than-usual bed. I hadn't realized how sore I was. I thought my rib was out of place. I needed to see a chiropractor sooner than later. That was a tomorrow problem. I booked the appointment after school, but before practice started. I stared at the ceiling, with tears starting to swell in my eyes. I cried myself to sleep again. Cameron was the first person to break my heart. I was only 17. Mom yelled at Sierra, waking me up. I reached for my phone, charging next to my bed, and the time read 11:07. Sierra must have been settling in for the night after her water polo practice. She typically gets home between 10:30 and 11 most nights, depending on which of her friends' parents ran the carpool that evening. Mom yelled at Sierra. I rolled my eyes and flipped from resting on one side to the other. Mom yelled at Sierra. I was angry. Mom and Sierra both knew how the last week had been going for me. They knew I was exhausted. They knew I needed to rest. Mom yelled at Sierra. After everything I'd been through recently, they really wanted to play this game. I was angry. How dare they think that yelling across the hall at 11 on a Wednesday night was reasonable? My anger started to bubble and finally came to a high, rolling boil. Did anybody in the house besides me have a brain? Who would even begin to believe for a second that yelling so late was acceptable behavior? Their ignorance was not bliss. It was fucking annoying. I got up out of bed and swung my bedroom door open to the lit hallway. All three of our bedrooms were upstairs. Mine, Sierra's, and my parents. I was always a tad bit dramatic, especially being a teenager. "Shut the fuck up," I yelled as I stood in the doorway. "I'm exhausted. I'm trying to sleep." I was met with an unsettling silence. I took 3 steps out from my doorway into my parents' room where Mom was lying on her bed. Sierra across the hall in her own doorway, confused. Mom looked pale. It wasn't a regular flu-like pale, though. It was the type of pale of someone going into shock. What I was witnessing reminded me of the simulations I did during my lifeguard training. We had performed 1 minor injury, 1 major injury, and 1 spinal injury to show our ability to do rescues to pass the exam. I'd been a certified lifeguard for just over a year. I knew the situation well. Mom was having a major. Mom grasped at her chest and looked at me. "I think I'm having a heart attack." I looked to my sister, who started to cry. Her face was red and she was choking on her words. "I'll wake up Jess." Sierra was exceptionally close with our German exchange student, Jess, who had been living with us for 5 months at the time. They were like best friends. Sisters. "Lock the cats up and unlock the front door too," I followed. Although my cell phone was just across the hallway, I ran down the staircase to the kitchen where we kept the landline and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" I was calm. "Hi, I need an ambulance. My mom is having a heart attack." I ran back upstairs to be with Mom. "An ambulance is on the way." I gave the 911 dispatcher all the information she had requested. Female, conscious, 50, chief complaint of chest pain, heartburn, shortness of breath, has experienced moderate to severe arm pain in the left arm over the last several days. The dispatcher was impressed. Are you a first responder? She asked. A lifeguard, I responded, knowing very well why she was asking. If Mom went unconscious or stopped breathing, it would mean that I would have to start chest compressions. I looked to Mom. She was beginning to close her eyes. I still had dispatch on the phone asking for updates. Mom, how was your day at work? I asked. If Mom is talking, she can't be unconscious. Mom spoke, but I could hear the pain in her voice. Is the ambulance almost here? I questioned dispatch. Soon. Stay on the phone until they arrive. I kept talking to Mom, asking if she was going with Sierra to her next tournament, if she wanted to come watch my next swim meet, anything and everything I could come up with to keep her conscious. Finally, I heard sirens. Downstairs, I heard the front door fly open and thick, heavy boots hit the ground. I stayed by Mom. Dispatch told me to end the call now that emergency response had arrived. I hung up. Several men and women bolted up the staircase to Mom's room. Right away, they started hooking up to a machine that would give them information on just how detrimental the situation was. All I could think about was needing to put on a bra. I went across the hall to my room, calmly looking for a bra to throw under my beat-up white t-shirt. My cell phone began to ring. Across the top of the bright iPhone screen, I read the name Melanie. It was my neighbor. Melanie was my age. Her family was very close to ours. We often had family dinners and get-togethers between our families. I answered the phone. Hello? I questioned. Do you need my mom? Melanie asked back. Yes. I had answered with a monotone voice. The front door is open. I put on a bra and ran down the staircase on a mission to find Sierra and Jess to make sure they were okay. Melanie's mom, Kathy, ran through the front door. Before she could say anything, I told her Mom was in her room. She ran up the staircase. I found Sierra and Jess sitting by the warm fireplace. Jess was hugging Sierra as she wept, her face still red. I walked outside into the crisp winter air. I looked around. White and red lights danced across the houses on the block. 2 fire trucks, 3 ambulances, just for Mom. It looked as though the whole neighborhood was gathered around. I looked to my right, and Melanie and my other neighbor, Marilyn, stood on the grass in our front yard. I calmly walked over to them. Marilyn hugged me and asked if I was okay. I was in shock myself. No, I spat. Mom was carried away on a stretcher and loaded into the back of an ambulance. Kathy right behind her. Neighbors retreated to their warm homes. Melanie went back to hers, but Marilyn came inside with me. We need to call your dad, Marilyn mentioned. I gave her dad's cell phone number. After a few tries, Dad picked up the phone. Hello, he spoke. He was on speaker, loud enough that I could hear him from across the living room. Greg, it's Marilyn. Who? Dad questioned. Hunter's here too, Marilyn continued. Hi, Dad, I spoke. What's going on? Dad quickly responded. His voice I could hear concern. Mom had a heart attack, Dad. She's on her way to the hospital. I'll head there now, Dad said, hanging up the phone. I blinked, tears streaming down my face. My therapist sat across from me, legs crossed, her notebook leaning against her chair. How does telling that story make you feel? She questioned. I feel guilty, I responded. How so? My therapist followed up. Well, I started. The only reason I even got out of bed was because I wanted to sleep. I only got up to get mad. I continued. I'm angry that I was so angry. I'm mad at myself for being so selfish. Frustrated, tears continued to roll down my face. But, my therapist continued, because you got out of bed, you saved your mom's life. You understand that, right? I hadn't understood. Until now, that is. I was livid that night. I wanted so badly to sleep, and when I heard all the yelling, all I could think about was myself. My blood boiled thinking about the situation, not because I was mad at my sister and Mom, but because I was mad at myself. Why did I go to bed so early? I should have just stayed up. I was angry. I was selfish. I was a jerk. A wave of grief came over me, followed by a calm lightness, as if a weight was lifted off my shoulders. 9 years later, I replay this scene in my head, guilty that I was so selfish for getting out of bed to get mad. 9 years later, I realized that maybe I wasn't being as selfish as I thought. I could have stayed in bed angry. I could have put headphones on and ignored the yelling, but I didn't. I cared enough to get out of bed and check in. 9 years later, I finally found peace with my mom having a heart attack. 9 years later, the trauma no longer controls me. 9 years later, I am free.